Released in 1933, Spring Silkworms was directed by Cheng Bugao and starring among others Xiao Ying, Yuexian, and Xiao, another famous actress of the silent era who passed away way too early. The movie depicts the story of a patriarch and his family of silkworm breeders and the ups and downs they go through during a particular tough year for the silkworm market during the early 1930s in Zhejiang. The movie itself is based on a novella of the same name published a year earlier by famous Chinese writer Mao Dun. I chose this film since it is often cited as an early example for the leftist movement, which includes movies such as the previously discussed The Goddess, and thus may give a deeper look into the ideas portrayed and expressed during this time. Those movies were often deeply concerned with the turbulent and ever-changing political and social environment that its people found themselves in, and try to address these rising issues in the form of literary and cinematic expressions. Unlike one expects, this movement was not really focused on one doctrine, but rather presents a discussion of different issues and the emergence of critical thought expressed through artistic means. Core issues were addressed in these movies, and they underlined the search for a possible better world, which can only be reached if these issues are addressed in a free, unified, and open way. While quite a substantial number of movies produced under this banner were concerned with the role of women and themes of women's liberation, others focused also on issues of nationalism, intellectual development and economic progress, or the lack thereof. As an early example of the leftist movement, Spring Silkworms falls under the latter category and dives into the exploration of economical, nationalist and spiritual issues encountered by a large part of the population. And while this movie delivers on these questions through its story, I have to say there are quite some issues that kept it from being as great as, for example, The Goddess. As a movie representing the leftist movement and as a movie to discover points of discourse, it may serve quite well. But as a viewing experience and from my personal point of view, I thought the movie's pace makes it very difficult to stay involved. The process of the silk making is shown in excruciating detail and often involves long, drawn-out scenes with no dialogue or real action on screen. It got to the point where a yawning actor was basically representing my perception of what happened on screen. From the hatching, to the feeding, to the transfer of the worms onto the straw for the spinning of silk balls, everything is shown, but in a way that makes it quite tiring for the viewer. Some have suggested that may be done on purpose, and it is supposed to communicate to the viewer the exhausting work and adequately translate the laborious life of the working people to the audience through the film medium. That may have been the attempt here, but in my view this approach works much better in written form than it does on a medium such as film and led more to a loss of interest at certain points in the film. There are certainly other movies, such as The Big Road, which manage to convey the same exhausting working class struggle without the same feeling of a slow pacing. So to me, the exploration of strenuous labor in the way the movie does it as a form of demonstrating class struggle does not really justify the drag. If the scenes do not make me feel involved, but rather make my mind wander off, it takes away from the possible impact the movie could and might I say should have. Besides those little gripes I have with the movie, there is a lot of good to be found here. The big topic of foreign influence on China through the Japanese aggression and the foreign influence on the market is wonderfully portrayed here through this small but all too common story. It greatly explores how the economic difficulties are rubbed off from the top down onto the producers, who are then hit hard by the consequences and left alone with their issues. Also, the patriarch's nationalism and his refusal to accept anything foreign shows a deep exploration of nationalist sentiment. Even though he lives in a world which basically tells him at every step to bend himself to the new rules of the world and just give in, he holds strong to his beliefs. This goes to the point where he even plays down any warnings he gets from the loan shark that he should change his business if he really wants to be able to pay back his debt. The movie is quite effective in making the viewer feel invested in the good and the bad occurrences for this family and the silkworm breeder village as a whole. You can really feel the sudden optimism when the harvest turns out to be much better than expected, but also the desperation and disappointment when the influence of outside factors causes the silk merchants to not open the market this year. The movie also discussed topics of superstition and a sense of old generation versus new generation. Several customs and supposed signs of bad omens are explored, and the movie even makes a point that knowledge can be used as a counterbalance to the old superstitions. One particular superstitious event which spans throughout the whole movie is the introduction of an offering the patriarch makes to the house altar. It is some sort of root or gourd in earth, and while I'm not familiar with the practice, we see the patriarch check on it several times throughout the movie, and in the end, the younger son of the family throws it angrily into the river. The very same younger son represents a more modern view and a generational spiritual and intellectual disagreement. In an earlier scene, he even states, when confronted by a woman who the villagers see as a bringer of curses of some sort, that he does not believe in the superstitions anyways. The role of the cursed woman throughout the movie also explores a little bit the other side of the leftist cinema of the early and mid-1930s. Meaning the role of women in society and the frequent demonization and violence that they experience on a daily basis. In summary, I must be realistic and say that while there are parts which are interesting and likable, I would not recommend this movie for people who want to casually explore Chinese cinema of the 1930s. It is not really a bad movie, but it's also not really a good movie either. It explores some of the central themes of the leftist cinematic movement, but there are far better movies that explore these topics in a way that feels less drawn out and more involving. On the other hand, if you are interested in the intricate process of silk production with a little bit of drama attached to it, this movie is just right for you. Next time, we will take a look at one last silent film before we move on to another historical cinematic background. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments or suggestions, just let me know in the comment section below. Until next time.